my guest here in the studio. We've been talking and having a wonderful time offline, and didn't realize that the time is ready for us to go on there. We've had a wonderful conversation offline as well. I'm really, really pleased to have met Jennifer Johnson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell our listening and our viewing audience who you are, whatever you want to share about yourself, and what you are running for, what seat you're running for.
Sure. So I am running for Boston City Council District 3. As you and your listeners may know, there's a lot of competition for the seat now that, since Frank Baker decided he was not running again.
Yes.
And why am I running? Well, a little bit of background.
Yeah.
I actually did not grow up here in Boston. I grew up in Louisiana. My mother particularly was very civically and politically engaged my whole life. My parents were divorced. My father had been a World War II vet. He was a naval vet in World War II. And my mother was a Democratic activist in small town, what became Deep Red, Louisiana.
Wow.
So I grew up with her being very engaged in political campaigns. She used to love to tell the story of how, when I was 3 years old, she was helping Bennett Johnston, who was running for U.S. Senate, on his campaign, and she took me everywhere with her. And so when election day came up and I was now 4, apparently I stood in the middle of the town hall throwing a fit because I couldn't vote for Bennett. And I wanted to vote too. So that kind of gives you a background on my political history. So I tell people I've been a Democrat literally all my life. So I came to Boston when I was 20. I had a job to work with MassPIRG as an environmental activist. When I came here, I didn't have family here. I didn't have friends here, or at least none that I could contact. This was 1989, so it was a good 20 years before Facebook took off. So anyone that I went to high school with at Harvard, I had no way to connect with them. So I was really here on my own, and I've built my life here in Boston over the past 34 years. And what I do now is I have my own small business. I run an employee benefits group, and I have been very politically engaged and civically engaged in my neighborhood. I live in Meeting House Hill, right off of Ronan Park, which some of your listeners might know.
Yes.
And for over the past decade, I have been helping to lead our civic association. I've been on our Main Streets board, a number of other local groups, and I've been on our Ward 15 Democratic Committee as well, and they just endorsed me last weekend. Thank you, Ward 15 folks. So I'm running because I have been politically engaged and active all of my life. And from working in my neighborhood, I've been helping with housing, business development, and public safety issues behind the scenes. So I've gotten to know how the city works on those issues. One might say the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So, I've learned, or I think that there are things that I could do on the city council that could help with issues, particularly housing. For me, that's going to be my top priority. We need housing for everyone who wants to live in the city, and that includes not only young professionals making 6 figures a year. That means folks who are working at McDonald's, folks who are teachers, who are our firefighters, who are our police officers, who are massage therapists. In fact, can we get some more massage therapists in Dorchester, please?
Yes. Yes.
And, everybody needs to be able to live here. And there are things that we can do, I feel, at the city level that would make it easier to build the housing that's needed, and to help make sure that we're building housing that is appropriate for all income levels. And I would also add, by the way, we also should focus as well on more senior housing, because we have a lot of folks who in this district are seniors, and a lot of people talk about aging in place, right? But I've dealt with my parents when they were both elderly, and they're both now deceased. But there comes a point in time in our lives where aging in place may not actually be the best option.
Yep.
And I'm concerned that we don't have enough senior housing that is appropriate for folks who might have come to the point where they really shouldn't be aging in place. So I see we have a housing crisis, basically.
We do. I'm so happy to hear that, because it certainly is an issue. And I'm curious in the context of that housing, and for you mentioned many populations. One of the populations that healing our land in particular has a high focus on is our returning citizens. And so many people who are incarcerated, they come out and they're actually indigent, or staying on somebody's couch, or and that runs into a whole lot of other issues where they need how can I say, they need housing that is a place of community, but positive, that can help them be empowered to be able to move forward, ultimately even home ownership. I mean, as we talked a little bit again offline in terms of the disparity of people of color, black folks, and that whole report that came out for $8 an hour to $247,000 for our European counterparts, and it has everything to do with land. And so we see here in Dorchester and Roxbury, Mattapan, this is the coveted area where every little patch of land, I mean, it could be a little park, any little piece of land, they're taking and they're building high-end condos. I don't see, there's a lot of development happening, there's a lot of, building, but I don't think, and they'll say that there's some affordable units. I'm always wondering who they're affordable for. But really, just innovation. Really, I think we have an incredible opportunity here in Massachusetts. We're really fiscally sound right now with a lot of the ARPA money and recovery money and infrastructure money, and not even mentioning tapping into holding the higher institutions of learning accountable to do more, that whole payment in lieu of taxes that I don't know that they're really paying. And we see they're sprawling out all across the city, Northeastern, and other institutions that I don't feel are giving enough back from what they are receiving from people from all across the country that come here for education. So just real innovation in terms of being able to have sustainable housing that is going to ultimately move people to even home ownership.
Well, first of all, I share your concerns about housing for folks who are returning. And I know that one of the challenges that we have had is that so many of our federal laws actually really negatively impact people when they're coming out of prison, and they're not supposed to get funding for public housing. They're not even supposed to live with somebody who has public housing. They're not eligible for government grants to go to college. To me, all of this is outrageous, right? I mean, when somebody has, as far as I'm concerned, when somebody has served their time, then they should be able to reenter society and try and do whatever anybody else has the opportunity to do, because they served their time. And I don't know what we can do on the city level per se in regards to helping on the housing side, because I don't know I don't know enough about how does the federal law trump anything that we might try and do in the city or not. But it would certainly be something I would want to, on the council, look at, because the way I think of it is we need housing for everyone. And I think part of what we've forgotten over the last number of decades is that housing is a public good. It's not just a private gain. And we've just forgotten that, right? When we talk about housing, all we ever talk about now is how much value it could be to someone, right? We don't talk about the fact that even if somebody's never going to own for whatever reason or doesn't want to,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
They need a roof over their head,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We see this every day, and this is in District 3. Mass and Cass is in District 3. I mean, we see that need for housing there every day. But that in that instance, that housing goes beyond just a roof, right? It needs to come with supportive services to really help people kick their addiction, right? And I don't think we've been doing that latter part. That's what I hear from folks who are in the health services arena. So to me, it's the biggest priority. We need to figure out how to house everyone. And I do think we need to come up with different ways of doing it. I will say that, Boston should know that we're not alone in this housing crisis. It's really nationwide, and apparently it's pretty much worldwide. Because nobody anywhere has been building enough housing for the increase in population and for the change in population, right? I think probably most people don't realize that 67% of residents in Boston are single.
Oh, wow.
That's according to the U.S. Census.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, wow,
yes.
2/3 are single? Yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is why I know so many women who are single like me. So our housing stock doesn't match our demographics, right? The condo I bought 17 years ago as a 37-year-old single professional woman is a 3-bedroom. Why? Were there really 1 and 2 bedroom condos out there? Not really.
Yeah.
So we need to match the housing that we're building to what our residents look like.
That makes perfect sense. I'd love to say, I know Mayor Wu has, made a commitment to housing. And with that, she's offered to be able, like city-owned land, like there's parcels of land that the city has to be able to give for a nominal amount of money, right? But that to developers. But then the challenge becomes, again, with developers that are going to develop that with innovation. That's really not just going to be, because let's be clear that many developers are there because it's about money. But there are developers who have a mindset of being able to, yes, make money, but also to build community and to empower people and to give back. And I think really having those kinds of creative partnerships with developers, faith-based community, with people whom can offer mental health services, right? Like all the things that you need. We have a vision being Healing Our Land, and this came through years of our quarterly community forum process, as housing is such an issue for so many folks to be able to train returning citizens with a marketable skill set like T. Michael Thomas from the People's Academy. You know of him?
I do know of him. Yeah. I met him, probably about a decade ago.
Okay.
I don't even remember how, but I was so impressed by what he was doing. And I knew back then, I was talking to him, and I had asked him, I'm like, oh, aren't you getting money from the city or the state to do this? And he was like, no. So it's funny, I actually saw him, the Dorchester Day Parade. I saw him on the parade route, and I recognized him. I hadn't seen him in years, and I went right over, and I was like, I know you. I don't know if you remember me. And I'm like, have you gotten money from the city yet? And he was like, no. And I said, well, help get me in the district seat. I'll help make sure we fund programs like yours. Because I just, what I didn't say in my background bio is about 20 years ago, I actually, because I'm a poet.
Oh.
And so years ago, I was with Penn New England on their Freedom to Write committee. And what we did for a couple of years is we went into the Northampton County Prison and we did writing workshops with prisoners there, and I helped coordinate that program for a couple of years. And so I got to know guys who were in prison, and it really was eye-opening. So I won't forget the very first day I went into the prison. I was actually scared because for some reason I thought the guys were going to be so different from like everybody else, right?
Sure.
And then you go in and you meet them and they're like, they could be your next door neighbor,
Yes.
right? And I'll never forget one of the guys who was in our program for a few weeks was actually a gang leader, and was in prison and likely was going to end up in prison for a while. All of us came out after meeting him saying, my God, he could have been president of the United States. Like, he had so much natural leadership ability. But that experience of doing that for a couple of years really opened my eyes to understanding, like, you know, who is in prison, who gets there, the things that happen in people's lives that can lead them to make decisions that they later regret. And so I feel very strongly that we need to do more to give folks who are coming out a real opportunity.
And I appreciate it. And so again, with T. Michael Thomas.
Oh, and again with him, I'm sorry, I go off the rails.
Yeah.
So with what I've always been impressed by with T. Michael Thomas is his program to give a real skill and a real trade.
Yes.
If I remember correctly, it's kind of like coppersmithing.
Yes,
copper.
He does copper.
Oh, you've got one of his pieces on.
Yes,
it's
yes,
beautiful.
yes.
And I just, even now, I can't understand how we're not helping to support programs like his.
Yes.
That are giving people, you know, real skills that they can use, that can give them and their families the financial support they need.
A living wage, right? So T. Michael Thomas, what he does, coppersmith, is a very unique niche, and you can make a good living. And it's something, I guess, that all buildings need some copper in them, but even the roofs of many buildings are copper. Yeah. So he has the T. Michael Thomas and the People's Academy to train returning citizens with a marketable skill so that they can make a living wage. And our desire is to partner with entities like T. Michael Thomas, like Reverend Hutchinson from the pre-apprenticeship training program. And again, this guy is actually a returned citizen himself, and he's at Greater Love Tabernacle Church, and again, faith-based kind of a organization that's dealing, training returning citizens, all the things that you need to be apprenticeships, right, and participate in the building, boom, but to build a 5-star hotel. You talked about massage, right, and all of the things that we have in a 5-star hotel, from doorman to valet to all of the service industries and excellence in the city, in Dorchester. Like, I'd love to be able to go and have folks in the community, a place where we can go for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner, for community, right? A drop-in center, 24 hours. I mean, they're in a block of rooms that they actually live in. Imagine you build it and you own it. Right, and then you have community, and you can lift your head up, and all the services that you need around you for you to be the entrepreneur. If you were a drug dealer, a gang leader, or whatever, you're a leader. You just need to use that skill set in community to be able to help you to do something that is going to be positive.
Yeah, so, positive for yourself and the community and your family.
Yes.
Right?
So we can do this.
Absolutely, it can be done. And, you know, I don't know how much you're working closely with like the regular trades unions, but I have been told that they are Corey friendly. And I also was told, and I didn't realize this, that which jobs are Corey friendly is actually based on the state law. So because I was talking to a trades guy and then an SEIU guy, and I was asking the SEIU guy about, you know, their standards for Corey, and the trades guy pretty much said to me, he was like, Jen, that's all based on state law. The trades are Corey friendly. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So they're, you know, I guess there are jobs out there that under state law, if you have a Corey, so if you're returning, you're just going to be disqualified from them. So that's one thing I'd like to advocate for, because,
that should not be the case.
That I don't think that should be the case. I mean, with some exceptions, right?
Sure.
But so the trades unions as a whole are supposed to be Corey friendly. So I will make a pitch to your listeners that if you have anybody in your family who's not going to college, who's a young man or a young woman, maybe they're not interested in college, one of the trades that's going to be in huge demand very soon are electricians. Because we are about 1 million electricians short in this country for what we need to switch our grid to renewable energy.
Wow.
So anybody listening, if you want your young folks to get into a profession that could, give really big returns, master electricians, by the way, can make $250,000 and more a year.
Wow.
So Pastor Hobbs, you and I probably went into the wrong field.
Right. Listen,
Anyway.
so the last, this is a comment from a person who's tuned in, says the last two mayors, being Wu and Janey, were not aware of the city had a returning citizens week, which was proclamated by Walsh. That being said, how serious is the city about helping returning citizens? And what is your stance on helping them? You alluded to that a little bit, but.
Yeah, well, my stance is, so the way I envision my district office is to really be a resource for people in the community. And maybe it's because I've been in business and in sales for so many years, but I almost envision like going out into the community and almost doing like little educational presentations on this or that the city has or does that people might be eligible to take advantage of that they don't even know exist, right? So, I envision being a real resource for the community, and part of that would be particularly helping to find ways to track people into training or programs or jobs that they would qualify for. So to me, part of being a district counselor, I see it as being a very hands-on role too. So like really trying to coordinate services for folks. And it could be somebody who's returning. It could be an elder, maybe it's a young single mom who needs help figuring out childcare, so that's how I, envision the role.
As soon as you said a district office, when people say a district office, oftentimes people think, a district office actually in the district. Now, is that what you were saying, or no? You're just saying a district in terms of, obviously you're representing the district at City Hall, but the resources are primarily what you were talking about. Is that something you would even consider, or? Sure.
I mean, if I had the resources, I would absolutely consider having a literal district office, and probably right in the center of the district, which is, frankly, it's about Fields Corner, right?
Yes.
Or maybe just a little bit further north in Dorchester. But I would absolutely, if the resources were there, I'd be happy to have a district office and, not just be sitting at City Hall all day long, which, is, even for me, I don't go to City Hall that often, right? So it just seems very out of the way. So if the only way you can see your district counselor really is going down to downtown, it just seems a little bit of a challenge. I mean, particularly with people working, and I would probably also try and work to have some, if I had the resources for an office in district, I would work to have hours that weren't your usual 9 to 5, right? Because that's when people are working. I'd want to have some evening hours. I'd want to have some hours available on the weekends, so that those times when people really have time, that's when we would be available.
Outstanding. I want to shift quickly, just only because the time goes so fast and there's so much.
And I talk so much.
No, I'm loving it. I love it. But I'm curious, public safety. So we talked about housing. That's a big one, right? Another big thing is public safety, right? We know unfortunately, it's interesting. It seems to me like the what I want to call it. It seems to me what's happening is Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, right? We know that they're allowing a lot of crime in District 3, even, right? They're allowing things. I mean, what's happening on Mass and Cass is just deplorable. It is. It, just, it breaks my heart when I go to the jail and see people caught up into the grips of addiction like that, mental illness, trauma. But to see this climate right now that is saying like that's okay, right? For you literally to be outside injecting yourself, injecting someone else, selling drugs. I mean, all that just comes in that whole culture to just and cops are literally just like. You know, and I know it's a mindset of low level things and, you know, and case management and the sensitivity, but that can't be the answer. Is just to allow it just to happen and just we'll sit back and just, you know, and the violence that's happening now, even with the people who are trying to help and be there. So it just violence is something that we've got to be able to address. Some things are just unacceptable. And so I'm curious with and from my perspective, some of it has to do with a different approach. It can't be just this militarization where we're coming just to arrest you, because we know that doesn't work either, right? But it can't just be a hands-off approach and just let y'all just do what you want to do. And so I really would love to hear what your position. And before you answer, I'm curious with regard to, we have a commissioner, we have a new commissioner who's charged with public safety. And community policing, I believe, is much of the answer. So we've got a commissioner, that's great. He's a great guy, so forth. And so we have, a detective, Detective Ellison, who's here. He is a detective working in the school system years. I think he's the #1 detective, as a matter of fact. He's got a retired deputy superintendent, Dr. Bradley, who's his co-host, but they have a whole organization. You know about MAMLEO,
Yes,
right?
I know about MAMLEO.
So MAMLEO is an incredible organization that is actually suing the city because of discriminatory practices of people who are rank and file, you know, sworn to serve and to protect, who are experiencing racism, sexism within the police department. And when they speak out against it, they are retaliated against. And so even they've had to sue them because of hair tests that's discriminatory, that they've been proven to be discriminatory. And they're continuing to appeal every time that they win a case. They just appeal it and wasting taxpayers' dollars, as opposed to building a relationship with MAMLEO, who we have relationship with. Detective Ellison is one who will call. We have, you know, and yes, we have some access to the commissioner, but it's not the same as I have his cell number.
Right.
I call him. We trust him. We can talk with him. We will share. We know what I'm saying. There's a relationship that I think that in connection with the commissioner, we could really start to do community policing and really start to address some of the kinds of stuff. So I'm curious, what is your position? What is your feeling, strategies in terms of how we can really address public safety?
Sure. Well, first I will start by saying I've always felt that, you know, public safety starts with public schools.
I'm glad you're going there.
So, you know, if the kids in our schools, right, are not being educated, or some kids are not given the same resources, the same learning environments, the same learning experiences as kids in other schools. And, you know, we see these inequities because we know that some of our schools, some of our Boston public schools, the kids in them have access to art, music, sports.
Yes.
And many others of our schools, none of that is offered. We know some of our schools, you know, kids are offered opportunities to learn foreign languages. In other schools, they're not. So if we don't treat the iniquities in our schools and get rid of those iniquities, we're going to continue having a group of kids who are coming out of our schools who don't feel they have any hope, right? And we have to make sure that our schools as well are giving kids the opportunities to understand what is available to them in life if they do this, this, and this, right? And it's not clear to me that that's really happening in all of our public schools. So so to me, that's one of the first places to go, right? The only way that, and by the way, the other first place to go on that is we know from studies and research that children who have preschool do ultimately do much better in life, right? Yeah. So, I think we need in Boston, we need to make sure we have pre-K across the board, right? And that to me is ultimately what will help drive down some of the crime we see. Because I think a lot of it, and this is because I live, I think, in the Bowdoin, Geneva, Meeting House Hill area, I see this, right? I see some of the kids and the young men who I feel like it's like they've kind of lost hope. And that's just because from a young age, we weren't making sure that they were having the resources to have hope.
I love it.
And
on the front end,
I think we have to start on the front end. Yeah. Now on more of the back end, and I say this as a woman who's had her own trauma issues. There are, I think, a lot of folks, particularly who are engaged in some activities because of trauma that they have had is not being recognized and not being dealt with. And so I think we also need to put more emphasis on mental health care for our community. I've always thought, it was interesting. I felt moving into the area of Dorchester that I moved into, I felt like, because I have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I felt like when I met a lot of people in the community, I recognized it. I'm like, I see you, right? But at the same time, I think there are a lot of people in the community who don't realize that's what their challenge is, because there aren't the resources around that can address it and guide them to the fact of this is what that is. This is what that is. Right. This is what that is. You're getting triggered, right? Because of something that happened to you previously in life. So I think on the front end, we need to deal with education. On the back end, I think we need to put a lot more into mental health services. But at the end of the day, too, I think there are times where we just have to recognize that sometimes some people really do need to be in jail.
Oh, yeah.
They're really violent. Sometimes people are really violent. They need to be out of the community because they're a danger to others. And there maybe are some other folks, maybe they're not violent, but they just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. Like I think about the fact that, for shoplifting, I kind of agree that on like the first offense, maybe you shouldn't give somebody a criminal record. But if you have somebody who keeps getting caught over and over and over again, at some point you have to say, you're not learning your lesson.
Yes. There's consequences for choices. And again, as you said, and addressing poverty, because in some instances, if you're, hopefully you're not doing this just to survive. And I just can't really believe that. I mean, I really just can't. I think, there has to be consequences and help folks. Even once you're incarcerated, to have resources in place to help you to correct, not just to, perpetually punish you.
Right.
So even inside being incarcerated, having programs and things that are in place to be able to help you to come out, to be referred to another, even if it's an institution or a place that you can thrive your best life.
Right. Yeah. And and again, I don't know where the city steps in with our county prisons and jails.
Right.
But, I'm old enough that I remember when prison wasn't just about prison. When I was a kid, prison used to be a place to be rehabilitated. That kind of went away with the Reagan era, right? And everything became about punishment, 3 strikes and you're out.
Yep.
And I think we're still carrying that with us all these decades later.
Yep.
But there is a purpose for rehabilitative services in prison.
Yes.
Because you want people to be able to come out and, have a good life and actually be in the community and be a benefit to the community and be a benefit to themselves and their families.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the same vein with regard to public safety, so when you went to schools, I want to go there for a moment because I appreciate I heard you say that everybody should have equitable opportunities for education. So the whole charter school thing here, but if you're fortunate enough to go to a MECA or to a charter school and have the intimacy and the focus and so forth, that's great, but everybody doesn't have that opportunity, and the public school systems really are just unacceptable, some of our public school systems. And if you're in some of the public school systems, even they're talking about moving is it the John D. O'Brien?
The O'Brien to West Roxbury,
Yes.
which I'm opposed to that move because to me, from what I understand, the O'Brien of all of the exam schools is the most diverse, and it pulls in the most students from Roxbury and Dorchester and Mattapan, and I just don't see most of those students even really being comfortable going all the way out to West Roxbury. And so I think I don't think that would be a good move. I've read that there might be other places right near there because I understand the thinking behind. They want to expand the O'Brien, and they want to be able to expand the trade school. But I understand that there's, I think, city land not far from there, where some people are suggesting they could build another school if they wanted. So, I'd like to look at that because I just think that would be a bad move. And yes, when I'm talking about making sure all the schools are good schools, I very specifically mean the public schools. And I have the women on my mother's side of the family were public school teachers going back generations.
Wow.
Like my grandmother was a public school teacher in Folsom, Louisiana. And I'm assuming she must have been a member of a union because she had a pension and everything. And there's no way that, anybody in Louisiana would have a pension without a union. So
Wow.
So I'm very much in support of public schools and figuring out what we need to do to make them successful. I went to public schools all of my life in Louisiana, of all places. But the school system that I initially grew up in was, I guess you could say it was closest to being like a suburban type of school system. Because I grew up north of New Orleans across Lake Pontchartrain. So I didn't grow up in an urban system, and it wasn't a really rural system. And if I had grown up in either a rural system or an urban system in Louisiana, you would not be having this conversation with me now, right? Like that's just a fact. And so to me, public schools are really important, and not for nothing, but District 3 is where public education really kind of began with the Mather School. The Mather School is the first public elementary school in the entire country.
Wow.
And so if your District 3 representative is not all in on public education,
That's a problem.
it should be a problem.
Yes. Did not know that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we need to pay attention to our public schools because it's through our public schools that the children of the families who have the least have the opportunity to get up and get out, and move into the middle class, getting the education and or the training that they need. And if we're not doing that for all of the students in our Boston public schools, shame on us, because this is where public education began.
In that same vein, so with regard to schools and public safety right now, we know that there's been quite a bit of violence in the schools, knocking out a principal, people bringing in knives and guns into the schools. And again, it's kind of a hands off because, again, we're in a culture right now where there, no police and no or school resource officers safety is a real issue, number one. And there's some city councils who've made a real clear stance that we need to have safe schools. And if that means metal detectors, there's some people who are adamantly opposed, saying they're traumatizing children because they're exposed to metal detectors. Though if you go to Disneyland, though if you go to, to
the airport,
City Hall, right, you're going to go through metal detectors. In stores. And so I think safety personally, I don't have children in the school system, but I personally think that it's, safety first, right? People, if they feel like they need to even carry guns, like these are the kinds of things that people need to feel they have relationship, that they can talk with someone, and that you don't have to revert to, I've got to carry a gun to protect myself. So I'm curious, what is your stance with regard to, because there's some folks who it's just mental health counselors, social workers, and not metal detectors and or resource officers. Some people think it's both. What would be your strategy to address public safety within the school systems?
Well, I think first of all, I think the schools should have the, safety resource officers. Absolutely. I don't know where I don't know where I stand on metal detectors. Okay. I'd have to, look at more of the research. Like, does it really, traumatize kids, for example? Yeah, sure. I don't know the answer to that. If it really doesn't have those kinds of effects, I don't know that I would be opposed to it, probably particularly more in the high schools. Although I know certainly kids younger than high school age can bring in guns. But I do think that we should have resource officers. I do think there should be a clear delineation, though, of an understanding of when the situation is serious enough that you really do have to get the BPD involved, right? Because, I don't want a prison to pipeline situation, which all too sadly happens. Yeah. So I can only imagine, a situation where it would have to get referred to the BPD, like if you have somebody with a live, a gun with live ammunition that you catch somebody with. But I think, that we'd have to figure that out. I also wonder sometimes, I know that some of our schools have a number of male teachers, but I also wonder sometimes if part of the issue is, when I was growing up, certainly there were frequently fights that boys would have with each other just because they're
going through this process.
They're boys.
Right. Yeah. Going through that process of just figuring it out.
And, it was usually always the male teachers who were breaking it up, right? Yeah. And I think that sometimes some of the challenge for, teachers, particularly if the school, most of their teachers are women, and some of the boys might be a little bit bigger and stronger, right? So I feel like, too, the other thing we need to encourage is more men to get back into education.
Absolutely.
And being teachers. But I do think we should have safety resource officers
inside the school.
And certainly in, maybe not an elementary school, but certainly in, our middle schools and our high schools.
In the same way with regard to school, what is your stance about an elected school committee? interesting enough, the people clearly have spoken in the city of Boston and resoundingly said that they want a fully elected school committee like every other city throughout the Commonwealth. We're the only city in the Commonwealth that doesn't have a fully elected school committee.
I was about to ask you how many non-elected school committees are there across the country. I don't know,
I
but
don't know either.
I know growing up in small town Louisiana, our school board, everybody was elected.
I think I can't say definitively, but I can say for sure Massachusetts that we're the only one.
Wow.
And I don't get it. I mean, honestly, the mayor has ran on a hybrid, right? She ran, that's what she campaigned on, and she's held that, even though the people have clearly spoken. And I feel like, and God bless Mayor Wu, I feel like when we elect you to do what we want you to do for us, right? You can't be, I just feel like you can't just say, I'm going to do what I want to do, though the people clearly have spoken. People elect you to represent them.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I was about to say in response to your question, it doesn't matter what I think about elected, the elected school committee. And personally, I thought a hybrid idea was fine, right? But regardless of what I thought or think, and I know it was a non-binding resolution, right? But the people in this city voted very clearly that they want an elected committee. So, from my perspective as an elected official, you should really be looking at that.
Thank you. A few more comments on that. Eric Kennedy says, "What did you learn from your run for the 5th Suffolk seat that you will use to help you in this run?"
Well, first thing I learned is that 6 weeks is far too short to run a campaign. That was the first thing I learned. Particularly at the time, I wasn't really known in the community at all. That's one thing I learned, that when you have more time, you have more time to pull things together. And what else might I have learned? I learned about the importance of, working to build coalitions with others. And because, when you only have 6 weeks, if you're not really known in the community yet, so you can build coalitions, you're not going to be effective. And I actually, when I ran, the truth is I did not expect to win that seat. I ran in part to let people know this was, I'm serious about working for the public good. And that was really only around that time that I started getting greatly involved. I had just started getting greatly involved in the community, and I kind of had to switch out my whole business life to do that, because I had been working for a number of years with a publisher, and I was in media sales, and I was flying all over the country about 6 months out of the year. So that's why I started working for myself ultimately, so I could be in the community and do work in the community.
I appreciate that you, many people run for office, and if they don't win, we don't hear from them again. So I appreciate the fact that you, that your commitment, so maybe that was, you didn't get that particular seat, but you're committed, you're still here, and now you're running for
and my commitment after that too was to really stay engaged in the community and do the work in my neighborhood that I've been doing. And like I said, that's the experience I want to bring to our district council seat, so I can work on housing and work on issues across the district that I've had literal hands-on experience doing.
So Eric did some research, as he's great with that, amongst many other things, and he says there are 14,000 school boards in the country. 93% are fully elected.
Thank you, Eric, for Googling that so quickly.
14,093. That's across the country. And our brother.
So we're definitely the outlier, you're saying.
Yes. And I love the fact that, again, you taught me that District 3, where the Mother, is it Mother?
Yeah, the Mather
School is the first public school.
First public elementary school.
Elementary school in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was
You
actually
went there? Huh.
it was actually founded by the congregation that I'm a member of. First Parish Dorchester, the congregation founded that school back in 16 something or other. Do you remember what year you went to the Mather? Do you remember the exact year it started?
No.
No. Okay. I don't remember the exact year. I feel like it might have been 1630 or 34 or something in that area.
Wow. So here you go, Eric. It's just David just called the top one. So Jamal Crawford, who's tuned in, he says, laugh out loud. The girls never have fights. He was
Well, I've got to say, Jamal, in the schools I went to, really the girls didn't have fights. It was always the boys, but that might have just been the schools I went to. So
and now there's definitely some real tough girls now. But I do hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying. The notion of male presence, in the schools, teachers, and I think it is important.
Well, and I think that mentorship is important.
Mentorship is very, very important.
I mean, I'm starting to read so much recently about, interestingly enough, the issues that white boys are having in this country because, and maybe it's even boys across the board, but because of lack of male influence and mentors, that so many boys are growing up in single parent families, which are usually it's the woman who's heading them, and there's so many fewer male teachers in the schools, and so young boys are they don't have those mentorship opportunities anymore.
It's very true. It's very true. Well, believe it or not, there's so many questions. We have to have you come back. This is not the end, but hopefully the beginning. And this is your first time on Boston Praise and on Healing Our Land. And God willing, you will come back many times. We're just going through all of the candidates so that we can be fair and nonpartisan. We did have on last week, as you may or may not know, Barry Lawton, as well as we had Joel Richards. And so we hope to have the other candidates to actually come on as well. Jamal's do you know Jamal?
I've met Jamal. I don't know if Jamal remembers me, but I've met Jamal.
Wow.
Yes.
So he's a comedian, and he says, laugh aloud, Vaseline and earrings off. Talks about some of the black girls fights when they talk about they would put Vaseline, so I guess that they would if they tried to scratch him, and maybe it would slide off, and they would take the earrings off. Like that's a black cultural kind of a thing in the hood.
I was going to ask at this point, Jamal, do you have some experience with girls beating you up?
Uh-oh. Now you're just looking up a Kendall because he's a comedian, but
well, that was meant to be a joke, Jamal.
Of course. But we have 3 minutes, and I'm going to give those 3 minutes to you, Jennifer, to just speak to our listening and our viewing audience, to tell them whatever it is that you choose to, with regards to why one should vote for Jennifer Johnson for District 3.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me here and for this opportunity. It's really been great talking to you both on the air and offline. And so I think why people should vote for me is I have, first of all, I have kind of an outsider's point of view of Boston. I've been here 34 years, but I grew up in Louisiana, which is not only a different state, it's a different culture. So there are things I see about things that have been done in the city that people, they keep doing them because it's always the way it's been done. So I think because I'm not from here, I can see some of those things that perhaps could be tweaked and perhaps improved. And maybe it's time to not do that anymore, right? Because, the housing crisis we have, the crisis we have in public education in our city, these have been long-term issues. And I think we need some folks on the city council who love the city like I do. And by the way, I might love the city more than many people who grew up in the city because I know what I left. So, who love the city and want the best for the city, but can see, things in a new perspective. I think we could use some new perspectives. I am very committed to being in this seat to do work for the community. I'm not running to build my name, to build my reputation. I don't even look at this as some kind of stepping stone. I really want to be in the seat to help the community and people in the district. And I will say as well to perhaps pay some attention to areas of the district that some other candidates and representatives of the district may not have paid as much attention to. So I will look to represent and help the entire district. And I think that's why people should vote for me.
And if they're interested in knowing more about your campaign, to be able to volunteer, how would they reach you? And or is your website or phone
Sure. So first of all, I will give out my cell phone number. So Jamal, feel free to call me if you have any questions. My number is 617-407-5987. When I'm in the seat, that number will not change. So that's my number. So any of your listeners can feel free to call me. You can also find out more about me on my website. It's jenniferjohnson4FORD3.com.
Thank you. And Jamal said, first day in high school, a girl tried to rob me at Umaga. Facts. Umana was her name.
Thank you for sharing that, Jamal.
Thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
Stay tuned. We'll go to our station ID. We will be back on the other side of the top of the hour for our next guest for the second hour will be David Baxter, a returned citizen doing some extraordinary work. So please stay tuned for 8 to 9. We'll be right back. God bless you.